Good afternoon. Welcome today to a special workshop meeting of the Oak Harbor City Council. Today is Wednesday, May 24th, and it is 2 p.m. I'd like for us to go around the table here and introduce those at the table, and then I think we'll be moving on to action items shortly thereafter. So I am Bob Severns, Mayor, City of Oak Harbor, and we'll go to my right here.
Okay. Erica Wassinger, City Council member.
Joel Servadius, City Council.
Arnie Peterschmidt, Project Engineer with Public Works.
Joe Stowell, City Engineer.
Kay Adams with KBA Construction Management.
Doug Merriman, City Administrator.
Rick Ullenberg, City Council.
Danny Pagano, Mayor Pro Tem.
Jim Campbell, City Council.
Thank you, and again, welcome. We have several items. I think we're scheduled to go until potentially 5 o'clock. I must say that I'm scheduled to be in Coopville at a meeting at 5 o'clock, so if we're still going strong at 4:30, I may turn it over to somebody else to complete the meeting. Let's start off with action items, and we have our first item is Public Works Engineering KBA contract extension. So I'll turn it over to our city engineer, Joe Stoll.
Thank you, Mayor, council members. You'll see in your packet we have an agenda bill for amendment number 2 to KBA's contract with the city for inspecting the work being done on the Deception Pass and Canoe Pass bridges. So this project has a little bit of history to it. I just thought I'd go through a little bit of it. Back in March of 2015, we issued the original professional services agreement with Gray & Osborne to inspect the bridge hangars. And at that time, we had to do a quick adjustment because the equipment that WashDOT proposed to use changed. So we quickly came back and did an amendment to that contract in April. December 1st, after reviewing the inspection reports and working on how we were going to address the hangars, we contracted with Gray & Osborne. Actually, we went through a selection process, and Gray & Osborne came out as the most qualified to do the work on that as well. So we came back on December 1st, 2015 to do a design for the replacement of those hangars. And in June of 2016, we went out to bid. So what the project is, it's replacing 165 bridge hangars on the west side of the bridge for the 10-inch main. It's over 1,400 feet of insulation that surrounds it. So you have the 10-inch pipe surrounded by insulation with some aluminum sheeting around it. And that also included the traffic control for the duration. So in August, Bridgemasters was awarded the contract to do the work, and they started promptly in September. In November, we had amendment number 1 approved by council with KBA. I should have put that on there a little bit clearer. And the work is largely performed at night. Well, it is only performed at night between 8 and 6. And I don't know, I've driven that path a number of times, but I think they've done a pretty good job of staying out of the way, and traffic's moved pretty smoothly. So just a summary of KBA's contracts. Those are the three, the original contract and the approved amendment, and the one we're looking at today for another $42,000, totaling $116,000 and some change. The total project cost for the bridge hangars is about $730,000. So, kind of put it in perspective of the cost of the inspection versus the cost of the project. That'll give you kind of a scale of things. And we're required, well, there's a lot of reasons why we're required to do it. Part of it is our Watchdog Permit. I think I have some of this on here, but our Watchdog Permit requires that a city representative be out there in case something should happen. Public Works staff, engineering staff is pretty busy, so we didn't feel it was prudent to send city staff out there every night when there's other work that needs to be done. And so we stuck our consultant with it, having to sit out there at night and watch things be done and make sure that they're being done properly and document it all. So why are we having to extend the contract? Well, you guys all experienced the same winter I did. It was just a little bit more than we expected. I have some pictures in a minute that show we once we pulled the insulation off, let me take another step back. When we originally did our inspection, we pulled the insulation off of one of the couplings. So coupling, for those that don't talk engineers, is where you have two pipe ends that come together, and it's a coupling that joins them so that there's no leaks. Well, when we pulled all the insulation off, it turns out the one that we inspected was the good one. So the rest of them were kind of skeptical. We spent a little bit of time internally going, okay, what are we going to do with these things? And we actually cut a piece out so we could see how durable it was. And we spent a little bit of time deciding the risk factor, the cost versus the benefit of what to do with those remaining couplings. And there's 14 of them?
17.
17 couplings and a couple expansion couplings too. So, and the cost to replace all of them, we feel it's better to watch and see how they work, and if we have one that has a problem, we'll go back and fix it at that time. So some of these, well, a lot of these have impacted Bridgemaster's schedule, so they plan to come out and do this from one end to the other. So when we looked at the coupling and some other things that came along, that they went away and worked on other jobs and then came back. So that added to the schedule as well. So I already talked about the last bullet point. Here's some pictures. It doesn't show terribly well, but that's one of the couplings you can see. It's been around for a while. So you can see why we question the integrity of it. The one that we did pull out of there, we had to work really, really hard to get it apart. And when we did get it apart, the gaskets that were in it were still pliable. And so we said, well, how about we, repair that coupling. That's what that red piece is on there. We had to swap it out with that to replace the piece we cut out. And we loaded the line back up, and that took a little bit of time, and watched. So we wanted to just do an field observation test. Are any of the couplings, now that we have the insulation off, are any of them leaking? And they aren't. And the top right photo, as you can see, that's kind of the working conditions they're in at night out there. The light in the distance is the traffic control, and they only have the lights right there on the rig with them. That picture's actually taken from the basket hanging over the edge of the railing. And so as it sits right now, you can see we have a nice shiny aluminum clad water line crossing the bridge. And I don't think any of us like the idea of leaving it that way. So we've worked with Bridgemasters and extended our timeline on our permit with Watchdog so that we could get it painted sooner than later. They're out there right now. Well, maybe not right now, but they've already done a fair amount of the preparation for that. And they will be done by June 15th because that's the end of our time with Watchdog. And with that, I'll take any questions you might have. It's a recommended action.
Okay, so you heard the recommended action. Any questions? Yes, Councilor Servadius.
So you said they're painting it, or gearing up to paint it. Was paint in the original plan and budget?
It is, and we're not, we had one change order with Bridgemasters at this point, and that was for the installation of that coupling. The rest of this time extension with them, I think they've had to eat a little bit on this project, to be honest. They haven't charged us, I don't believe they charged us anything for mob and demob the several times they've come back out.
Councilor Ollenberg.
Thank you, Mayor. Who was the original design engineer?
Gray and Osborne.
Gray and Osborne. Excuse me. Why are we needing a second engineer on less than $1 million project? Why isn't Gray and Osborne doing the inspection and the follow through on paperwork, performance of pay request, etc.? And then KBA is doing a good job for us down on the wastewater treatment plant, but it just seems like we have 2 layers of engineering plus our engineering staff?
Arnie has responsibility.
We asked Gray and Osborne to do that for us, and they couldn't. They don't have the staff to station out here overnight.
So obviously, we didn't ask.
It wasn't in their
Question when we got
it
into
wasn't in their scope of services for
Yeah.
design of the replacement coupling or replacement hangers.
That might be something we give some thought to the next time we have a selection of engineering services, so that we're packaging things up in a tighter bundle than getting layers upon layers of engineering. You know, the more layers you have in the game, the more work you guys have in this thing too.
Well, keep in mind, it's not necessarily engineering staff that we have out there. It's an inspector that's out there, so the rate is probably lower than if it'd be an inspector from Gray and Osborne, not an engineer as well, if they were out there.
Yeah, I understand that, okay.
Anyone
Thank
else?
you. Yep.
Oh, I'm sorry. Are you done?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Yes, Mayor Pro Tem.
There are 2 water lines, the 10-inch and the 24-inch pipes. When inspection was made on the 10-inch pipe, was inspection done also on the 24-inch
Yes.
pipe?
Yes.
The same
It was
time.
it's a newer system, and we found it to be in excellent condition.
Sounds good.
Mhm.
Okay, thank you.
I might have been preoccupied. How do we pay for this? Did you,
It comes out of the water fund.
okay, so that is money that we have currently in our,
Yes.
yeah, okay. Anyone else? Yes.
One more question too. You know, we don't have a breakdown, any details on what this change order amendment is about. When we get our packet, our council packet, we'll get detailed breakdown how you arrived at the number for this amendment.
It's actually, this is the action item for today, so if the breakdown's not currently in there, we're not coming back on the 6th with it again. We're hoping it's an action item for today's meeting. But it is something that I can get for you.
Yes, we don't normally take action at a workshop.
Yeah.
But I think they are okay.
Well, there must be a timeline tied into this then to keep it going.
You want to speak to that, Kay?
Yeah, with everything, time is money, you know that. We've done the best we could to try and be, and honestly, we're only there when the contractor's there working. We're not there when he's not. For instance, last night they were there for an hour and a half and they called it off because of the high winds. The night before they were there for an hour because somebody wasn't ready, something else happened, so our inspector was only there for an hour. So out of the last 2 nights, there's only been 2.5 hours of inspector time that you're being charged for. But again, it does come down to it's a time thing, and if we've got an inspector that needs to be there for a full 8 or 10 hour shift, and they're there for full 8 or 10 hour shift, and as the timeline increases from the contractor needing to do extra things, we did stop and we tore apart the one coupling, made sure that we're doing the right thing, and we did some exploratory things. We're there for that also to make sure that all happened. What this is just a continuation of services. I don't think there's anything extra in there that you'll see as far as breakdown. It's just a time thing, and because I didn't want to come to council again after this time, I'm a little high. I think I'm.
Well, yeah, I'm kind of
estimated
wondering why
pretty
we
high.
have a 60% cost increase, and how do we explain that compared to the previous work that you had contracted for?
Right. Originally, it was going to be a 6-week in and out, and that started in September of last year, and here we are in May, almost June. And it hasn't been a solid thing. There's been a couple of months they took off to do some things. There have been some exploratory things, but in the meantime, they have been in and out and out and in, and needed some inspection work during that period of time. So that's really what it is. It's just a cost for presence. It's like you're trading time for money type of thing. And it's not the best way to do it, but it's a way to do it, and it's probably the only way with this type of project where you don't know what you're getting into. Particularly this type of project where you don't know, you can see what's on the outside, but until you crack that nut and get inside, you really don't know what's in there. And so, you know, we've worked with the city of Oak Harbor quite a bit, and I thought, I'll be a little, you know, lean on it, thinking that, yeah, we'll get in and out of there in 6 weeks. It looks like a pretty easy project, and then, well, you know, it hasn't been that easy. It's gone a lot longer and a lot more complicated than what we originally thought it was going to be.
What percentage of the project's completed right now?
We're pretty close.
I mean, they're at the point now where we're
90.
90?
We're close.
So I'm just doing some percentage numbers with you now. We got a 60% increase, roughly, on the KBA inspection to inspect 10% of the work to wrap it up. And no doubt you have some closeout paperwork to do that gets involved in this thing. So help me understand, with only 10% left to do, how do we justify that kind of money, 60% increase to the contract?
So I understand where you're coming from, and the idea was to get us, be a little bit conservative and get us through June 15th, as if they were working 8 hours a day to get us there.
And this is a T&M agreement?
It is T&Ms, and, you know, like Kay was mentioning earlier, it's, if they're out there for an hour, that's what they charge us for. So, it's, you know, you're right, it is a little bit on the conservative side, but we're not gonna fill the closet, there's no intent to. And as we were putting together this agenda bill and the cost for KBA services, they were just getting started on the painting, and we didn't have a clear picture of how much of an effort that was gonna be.
So KBA is inspecting the painting also?
Yes.
So,
Well,
And the last thing I'd throw in is that it's not a lump sum contract, it's a time and materials
Yeah.
contract, as you know, so it'll, our hopes are that we're gonna way underrun that amount, but again, I didn't wanna come back to council a third time, because frankly, you know, it's not an easy task to come before you guys and tell you we need more money for these sort of
it
things.
shouldn't be easy.
It shouldn't be easy, I know, and it's not, but I just wanna make sure that we're able to complete the project, get it in and out and be done. And
So we're gonna get a report on this when it's completed, what the final cost was, and
Sure.
so we get another look at that.
You know, we have, with all of our construction projects, we have a final construction voucher, final contract voucher certificate. I don't know why Watchdog came up with that weird name, but anyway, it's basically a sign off from the contractor stating, we're not billing you anymore, and we're saying, we're done paying you. And that comes before council for approval. And at that time, when we do the presentation, I could do a summary of the whole thing.
Thank you.
and actually, we do have this June 15th deadline
Yeah.
that we're working on.
Right.
Isn't that the real answer to his timing?
Well, that is
Okay.
but it'll be probably August before I come back to you with the report, because it takes time for all the bills to be finalized. But I will come back to
And
you.
so this $42,000 is $42,000 for anticipated work, not 35,000 plus 10% or something like that, so that that's it. That's
it
the
better be.
end of the job, or
We're
less.
hoping. Again, I'm with you, I hope that that's it. It's a night job, it is hard to staff,
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
So staff is proposing that we authorize this work to be done today. How's it come? Councilor Servadius.
Thank you, Mayor. I move to authorize the mayor to sign professional services amendment number 2 with KBA Inc. in the amount of $42,000, increasing the total contract amount from $74,985 to $116,985, and changing the PSA expiration date to December 31st, 2017.
Second.
So we have a motion by Councilor Servadius, second by Councilor Campbell, as reads on our screen. Any additional input or questions? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. We are done with our action item for today, it looks like. Not that there won't be action. Still happening. We're just a couple of minutes past 2:15. I am very happy to introduce a couple of people here in our audience and invite them to the table if you'd like. We have coming up Faith Wilder with the Would-Be Homeless Coalition and George Saul with the Shelter Planning Committee to give us some discussion here on homelessness and the Oak Harbor Haven. So welcome.
Thank you,
Turn it over to whoever wants to take on.
Mayor, council members, great to see you. We do want to give you an update today on the homeless shelter, the recently opened Oak Harbor Haven. And in giving you that update, I'm sure we'll touch on other aspects relative to what's referred to as the housing continuum, or affordable housing, or housing in general, the homelessness aspect, which requires a shelter being part of that continuum. And Faith Wilder, as the mayor mentioned, heads up the Would-Be Homeless Coalition, used to be the South Would-Be Homeless Coalition, and has subsequently broadened its scope and its purview to all of Would-Be. And that came about as a result of the Shelter Planning Committee, which convened under the chairmanship, informal chairmanship of Joanne Pellant. Joanne's the county's housing coordinator. And about 18 months ago, a dozen of us started meeting every other week to talk about housing related issues, homelessness and other housing issues. And we had just a homegrown grassroots organization. A couple of us were meeting even less formally, and Joanne said, well, let's sort of go to an every other week meeting. And so we did that, and over the course of those weeks and months, we asked, Faith was part of the discussion, and we asked the South Would-Be Homeless Coalition if they would indeed sponsor a homeless shelter in Oak Harbor. And Faith went back to her board, and they said that they would very much like to do that, and that was the part of moving from just a southern orientation to an inclusive would-be orientation. And the shelter committee continues to meet, even with the shelter open now for a little over a month. And we provide sort of a steering committee or oversight function to the management of the shelter. We're just a bunch of, or not even a bunch, right? We're not even a gaggle. We're about half a dozen of your neighbors who meet on this subject informally every other week. And we've had representatives from some of the social work groups, from the city, planning department, police department, parks and rec, the county, of course, some of the faith groups, the Rotary, a couple of the civic organizations in town. And so, we don't put nearly the time and the effort that you ladies and gentlemen do, for which all of us are appreciative, but we're trying to do our little part in an area that's of interest to us, and trying to move forward in that regard. This housing continuum at the bottom of the foil there, we're going to give you an update on the shelter, which deals with those who are homeless or unsheltered, which is the most visible aspect of that continuum. Not telling you anything you don't know here is part of a preface. As a result of the growth in the population, at the same time we've had insufficient housing development in our community, the result of that, as you can imagine, has been, and it's a matter of definitions, I guess. It's like the difference between the pig and the chicken, how committed are you? So depending upon who you are, the housing situation has resulted in a crisis or an emergency for many of our neighbors. About 4,000 people on the island, 4,000 households, so maybe 10,000 people. 4,000 households make less than 50% of the average median income and spend greater than 30% of that income on housing. And as you may recall, if you spend 30% of your income or less, that's affordable housing. If you're forced to spend 30% or more, that's not affordable housing. So we've got 4,000 families earning less than 50% of the average income, spending greater than 30% of their income on housing, i.e. unaffordable housing. And then we have a subset of those thousands of families who earn less than 30% of the average. So if the average is 70, these people are making 30, it's 21,000 and spending greater than 50% of that income on housing. So as proud as we are, as I am, and I know you are, of our schools, of our community in general, our schools, police force, crime rates, the health care we have, the vistas, so much to do here. We have so much to be proud of. Affordable housing is an area that I hope we all agree we still have to work on to take care of about the 20% or so of our population who we don't run into at Rotary, we don't run into typically at our church, we don't run into at the yacht club, we don't run into at the golf club. These are, and I'm not talking about the homeless, I'm talking about these people who I just described, not making so much money and spending most of what they make on housing, who are typically a paycheck away from being homeless as the apartment availability has been reduced, as rents have increased, and so on. So we're on a slippery slope relative to housing. We're going to talk to you today about the more visible, the truly homeless and unsheltered part of that. But this continuum, most of us sit out at the far right. We're fortunate to sit out there, independent, market rate. You know, we all bitch about our mortgage or our rent or whatever, but it's affordable. And it's the folks to the left who we don't always come in contact with, and particularly those unsheltered that we're going to talk about. Joanne and the county started this housing support center, this coordinated entry point back in August. And the idea is, instead of, if you have a housing issue, instead of going to 15 different offices in the county, including the city, with your housing problem, you come to the county's housing support center. And since August, we've had 880 individuals come in, so sort of self-identifying, self-reported. We, the county, we, the city, we've been able to help address some of the needs through the Opportunity Council, through Compass Health, through the Would Be Homeless Coalition, through Ryan's House occasionally, through institutions and services that have been set up to help care for people with these kinds of problems, difficulties. We've been able to serve some of them. There are a number of households that we haven't been able to serve for a number of reasons. 70-ish% of those, you know, right here in River City, you know, North Island, Oak Harbor. I didn't put it on there. And I've struggled with this in the past, and I wouldn't be surprised if some of you struggle with some issues regarding homelessness or housing issues. You know, there was a period when I went out of college, period of time when I easily made less than 50% of the average median income, probably 30%, you know, $700 a month. I easily spent greater than 30% of that meager income on my housing. Many of us, if not damn near all of us, have spent a period of our times in that bucket. You know, I lived in a dilapidated single-wide trailer with two other guys, so the three of us could pay the rent. You know, so most of us, I don't want to speak for. We've been through this. A difference that some of these, some of our residents, some of our neighbors have, as self-reported here, for example, is 42% of these people, of these households, report mental health challenges. 13% of them report physical health challenges. A quarter of them report that they're disabled. 10% of them report that they have chemical dependency. So a little bit different profile for many of them than the profiles we had as we passed through this stage or this bucket. The time we spent in this bucket, most of us were able to move on to another bucket. Sometimes these folks, for 1,000 reasons, good and bad, haven't been able to move out of this bucket. So with that sort of backdrop and a little bit of a perspective, let's update you on the Haven.
Thank you, George. We first want to acknowledge Spin Cafe, the leadership of Vivian Rogers-Decker, who not only is the board head of Spin Cafe, but also the homeless liaison in our school systems, which is a vital source of information and insight into the condition of the community as respects those most at risk. So Spin Cafe plays an integral part in having the Haven operations work, and also leveraging the work that they do, connecting with homeless people so that the Haven is a natural next step for them. So it's been an incredible asset to getting going. Spin has time while people are hanging out there in order to see what services they need, see that they've got the contact information to get into the various providers that are available to them. Christian Reformed Church out on Swantown Road stood up to be our first location to host the shelter. They're not technically in the city, it is on county property, but certainly providing a city and island-wide service. They'll be the host for 90 days. We open on April 13th, so they'll run to just about August, and we've just had the good news that the Methodist Church here just over there, will be our next 90-day site. Our dream, of course, being to sooner or later have a site that's dedicated to this. The Word of Everlasting Life and Faith has donated their van, and the Lions Club every night and every morning is driving those vans to get people from Spin Cafe out and back. So the basic process, I'm gonna really rush through this because I would like to really invite your questions at the end. This is a low barrier shelter. It means there are very few reasons for which somebody is not able to be admitted into the shelter. Intake is done by Spin Cafe staff at Spin Cafe. Only those who will be admitted to the shelter are then vanned out to the Haven site. Meanwhile, at the Haven, our Homeless Coalition shelter manager or assistant manager are out there setting up the fellowship hall to become this overnight sleeping area and for the people. They're also there to make sure the volunteers have shown up and to be there in the morning to tear down. People from the church tell us they don't know that we've even been there. The church is unchanged from the time they last left it. So this happens at night, and they have no real awareness of it. The guests are returned to Spin. We understand that through a very Spin does not typically open till noon or 3 o'clock in the afternoon. There's been a recognition of the need for the people coming out of the shelter to have some place to go, and the community and individuals have stepped forward to very generously expand spin hours, so there will be in the near future a interface with bringing the people back to Spin Cafe and they're being able to be admitted to Spin. Some quick comments to the utilization. I'll let you read through that. An important element of this is that this is being well used by women and children. We did have some concerns that shelters often are kind of co-opted by guys, and women may be reluctant or feel unsafe in coming to it. And it's a great boon for both the community and for what it says of all of our work, that this is being accessed regularly on a nightly basis by women seeking shelter and seeking that good night's sleep. Our trajectory, we started out with few people. The word is going out. We're well up over 15 people a night. We've had nights of 23 people. So we see that there's increasing utilization of the Haven. This is where they were the nights before coming into the Haven. The question is asked, how long have they been homeless? We kind of expect the more than 1 year. There are a lot of people that are chronically homeless here on the island, really all over the island. The fact that 50% of these people have been homeless once or more just under a year, and many as frequently as right now, speaks to how kind of fresh this is, how much it's growing, and speaks to the lack of capacity in the community to respond quickly to the needs of these people to get them housed. You might ask, I'll anticipate a question, why aren't there more? We do have stringent rules. In fact, I've got a copy of our Haven rules here for you if you're interested in having those. Many deselect because they don't want to adhere. They're not able to adhere. People who are homeless are very isolated. Many are not socialized to coming in. And many more of them, there's no place for their possessions. And if they disconnect from that, there's great fear they'll lose their things, that their vehicle, if they have one, might be ransacked, and so there's great fear factor keeping people from coming in. We speak to the isolation issue. It's really interesting. I've had, since my corporate life, I've had a lot of involvement with shelters all over the country. It's very unusual in an urban setting to find anybody who does not have a cell phone. This is not a luxury, it's a necessity. It's the only way to stay connected, find out where the soup kitchen's open, find out, where to sleep that night. So that so many of these people are out there without a phone means they're very, very disconnected. They're isolated, no family or other people for emergency contact.
A little discouraging,
Yeah.
that part of it.
Connection to other agencies, this also has surprised us. Remember, we've only been open about 40 days, so we're giving you really the first, we spoke often in the community, and you were at so many of our community conversations. We didn't really know who we would get or what the problems were that could become apparent until we began to get our arms around these people. The fact that so many are not yet registered with the housing support system is a concern to us, and something that we feel that we need to amp up the energy around in order to begin to get them connected with services so that there is a potential for their moving on to something better in their lives. The outreach is a really important part. We couldn't be doing this without volunteers, and I have to admit that this is actually, at this moment, probably our biggest struggle. We are staffed, our methods work, we've got a system that is operating, but it takes an awful lot of people to do this. 2 volunteers a night. We've reached out to in several different ways, but the Christian Reformed Church, the Methodist Rotary Club, Church of the Rock, St. Stephen's, we have a cadre of additional volunteers. The Lions Club are out there every night, but we're continuing to, tonight we'll be training 10 new volunteers. We also need a strategy to reach out to the businesses and reach more of the community, since at this point it's been primarily the churches that have been responding to this opportunity to serve. So in just these days, we have touched 44 different people, and in some instances changed their lives, but for all of them positively affected their lives. For many, this is the first good night's sleep they've had. They're not worried that somebody's going to victimize them. They're not worried that they're going to lose their stuff. They're not worried that the rain's going to pour and their tent's going to leak. They have had shelter and hospitality. Our volunteers, the people of this community, have really been terrific beneficiaries of this. The comments coming back from our volunteers, some of whom were quite fearful or reluctant, but took that first step of how life-changing it is to be the shepherd and overseer and caregiver to these people has been just great. We're really working hard on our partnerships. SPIN, the churches, community organizations, and we are working to grow more of our relationships. We're seeing how important the role of would-be health is to who comes or goes from this shelter, and how their physical and other needs can or cannot be met. CADA advises us, as do the police, that domestic violence on the base in particular, but community-wide, is just exploding. We're seeing these people in our shelter, what that means for what's required of us to serve and to be helpful to this community. But we do know that we've got 2 guys that have jobs that didn't have them until we connected them with a landscaper, and we've got a young woman and her child that are now in at least transitional housing and protected.
He's in school.
And he's in school, which he had not been able to be while they were going place to place to find housing at night. Thank you for reminding me of that. So I want to take just 1 minute of your time to tell you a little bit more about us, because since our entry into this community has really been as the Haven operator, I really wanted to put this into the context of our overall work, because we were founded 3 years ago to address shelter and homelessness, and we were focused on the South End because there are no services. All of the Compass and mental health and all of that, none of that happens in the South End. There are some shelters up here, none in the South End. So the South End was, 3 years ago, completely unserved in terms of the homeless. We have since then opened a 90-day temporary shelter, and we've moved more than 110 individuals through there to permanent housing, or diverted them to families or other locations where they had support networks. One of the things that we discovered, though, is that homeless people have to be mobile to take advantage of the opportunities wherever they come up. So we have actually, for the last 2 years, been housing people in Oak Harbor. We have a 5th wheel donated to us that's sitting in Parkwood Manor. We've gotten people into subsidized housing up here. We've even gotten people into rental. So our program has actually been here and on the ground. You just don't see us, but these are people that are housed. And the important thing about how they're housed is we have a mentor program that basically walks with them for 9 months, working week by week to solve their individual issues around license, warrants, credit. How do you keep a house in shape that your landlord doesn't kick you out? Our goal is to keep these people housed and not have any return to homelessness. So emergency shelter, you know of through the Haven and previously through our warming shelter in Langley. Our temporary shelter really is building and changing lives. Affordable housing is what I spend almost all of my time on. I'm trying to crank loose broken down manufactured homes. We'll rehab them and put a family in. I'm trying to get donated fifth wheels and RVs. I'm working with landlords to see if I rent the place, will you let me put 2 families in there in order to create affordability? We are being very agile and creative to make anything work, to make something better than sleeping in a tent or even in the Haven overnight shelter. And I can't speak enough of our mentor program, lining people up with people like yourselves who are life competent and can share with young families. 50% of the people that go through our temporary shelter are children. So we're working on their parenting. We're working on keeping them in school. We're working on what do you do when you're a working family and you've got all these kids all summer long with nobody that you can afford to take care of them. So we're trying to really make life changes. So that's us, it's important that you know we've got mentors up here. We're going to be coming back to you talking about a wider spectrum of this potential to serve the homeless here than strictly the Haven, which is barely 1 foot into the process of how do we help people have their best lives. So I'll turn it back to George.
Thank you. It's been a treat for me, as you can sort of tell, to meet and work with Faith and Joanne and so many other good people in our community. And I think you can feel her sincere passion for what she does to help our neighbors. So for the most part, we like the fact that this is a community effort, and it's got some, ties to the government and other agencies. But we really pride ourselves on not dumping all the burden and on the load on you, our elected officials, on the government, right? Which is everybody's quick, well, so the city can do this. So we do have a funding request buried in here, but we're trying to do most of it on our own and wean ourselves from governmental funding as we go, and increase the community aspect of this in all dimensions. The largest community involvement, as Faith pointed out, are volunteers. We'd love to see you. Training's about 2 hours. You have to be trained before you can volunteer. 2 volunteers a night. Whether you do it once a year, once a quarter, once a month, twice a year, up to you. We do have about a $55,000 budget. We have a shelter coordinator, an assistant shelter coordinator. We're really worried in a positive sense about keeping them healthy, because they've been knocking themselves out trying to make sure that it kicks off well and they meet themselves coming and going. So as a volunteer, you get there around 6:30, and as a volunteer, you leave there around 6:30. They don't spend the night anymore. The shelter manager or the assistant manager, Bob and I spend the night. They help set it up. We come in, we volunteer. They come in, help tear it down. We go home. and eventually they go back to what they were doing, but they're on a grind. So most of our budget goes to those two staff people.
And the spin staff
Who
who work
does-
extra hours to do our
to
intake.
do the intake. But we do have a little bit of a budget shortfall. We'll do fundraisers as well, but if the city could consider helping out as shown there a little bit, that would be obviously well appreciated. The sheriff's office, it was on a foil, we didn't talk to it, has been phenomenal. We have not bothered them. We briefed them. We solicited their involvement, coordination. Mark Brown, as you can imagine, was a prince. He brought in his staff. Staff's wonderful. The deputies actually come out and see us a couple times a week on their own volition, just to check in. Of course, we had them out ahead of time to show them the lay of the land, show them which door to come in, where the exits were, so if there had been a problem, they weren't going in blind. We'd ask for the same support from the police department here in a couple months when we move to the Methodist Church, and I'm sure we'll get the same kind and supportive reception from the police department as we've had from the sheriff's department. Parks and Rec has been very helpful. We try informally to help some of the campsites, or some of the owners of some of the campsites, when the unauthorized campers leave their mess, because there's no place to take their mess to, not to make excuses for them. But if we try and clean up that mess, Hank's been very helpful at helping us clean up the mess on properties within the city, so that the homeowner is maybe more receptive to letting unauthorized campers stay on their property. So if we come upon what I would term common sense areas where the city might be able to provide some assistance, police, continued Parks and Rec involvement, that would be helpful, and thank you ahead of time. And we want to keep you informed and aware, and then you can involve yourselves based on, on your specific and personal situation. If you can become more involved just as another neighbor with us, that's great. If you're full bandwidth and don't have that capability at this point, that's understandable too. So hopefully this has been a helpful update, and as Faith said, if you have any questions, we'd love to try and answer them.
Thank you, Faith and George. We appreciate your time. How about it, Council? Yes, Councilor Kelly.
I saw on one of your slides where there was the statement that a lot of people are living in their cars.
Yes.
If I were one of those guys and I showed up at the church down past the golf course in my car, are you going to tell me I have to go back to the Spin Cafe and sign up to get there? And my recognition of Spin Cafe, they don't have a heck of a parking lot.
Well, you've put your finger on one of the deterrents to people actually using the Haven. The church has been gracious to make this space available, but it's been with a lot of discussion with their congregation, and one of the things that they settled that they are not able to allow people to park there. That was their choice. So a person couldn't come out there and park and have his car there overnight.
They can't come in there at 7:30 in the evening when the buses show up with the other people, and then will leave the next morning when everybody else leaves?
That's right. The church has asked that people not park there.
Okay.
That's also a very difficult thing for our volunteers for our staff and volunteers to manage, because there are people that have illegal substances or who have things in their car, and monitoring their going out to their cars and coming back and what that does for behavioral issues. So it's perhaps not the ideal situation, but we'll have another set of rules around how the Methodist Church would prefer that their space be used. And we want to be respectful of that. The neighbors of the church came to a public forum and very strongly expressed that they didn't want cars in the neighborhood. So that was not just the church, it was a neighborhood consensus that brought, invited people to be out there in an uncontrolled manner.
Okay, thank you.
It is an obstacle, though, to your
Okay,
point.
Thank you. What's your plan and what steps are you gonna go through to get the rest of the community, like the other churches and organizations and all that kind of stuff, involved? Is it just you two going out and giving your canned speech to them, or is there something else?
Well, I've gotten to know the churches of this town very well. Did you know there's 42 churches in
Yes, I
Oak
do.
Harbor?
Yes.
I've been to many. I like to think it's not a canned speech, having a real conversation about what's needed and how they can help. We're hoping to be on the Chamber of Commerce agenda very shortly so that we can roll out to businesses. And yes, we'll go out to the banks and the realtors and some of the larger established businesses and have brown bag lunches at Skagit College to recruit out there. And we're seeing the need for a volunteer coordinator because our shelter staff actually are doing the majority of the community calling and outreach, and we need to broaden that base. But we do have a volunteer plan. I'd be glad to share that with you.
And we want to go online also, so that community members at large can sign up to become volunteers.
I asked the question because Sunday morning, the last thing our pastor talked about was getting the elders in the congregation together to talk about this subject.
I
Wonderful.
can be there any.
No, it's apparently past you.
Okay,
It was, what are we going to do?
Oh,
What can
Good.
we
okay.
provide?
wonderful.
To the extent that there's questions that arise, don't hesitate to come
I'm
to
sure
us.
they know about you.
Thank you. Other
Thank you.
questions?
Yes,
I know
other-
your time is,
other
our time has
questions?
run out.
Well, I want to say one thing, a couple things, actually. It was probably 25 years ago in my business career, maybe 30, when I was always early to work. Cup of coffee, usually took it over and put it in the dumpster on my way into work, and I opened the dumpster and there was somebody sleeping in our dumpster. That was, again, could have been 30 years ago now.
Or it could have been yesterday.
Well, I'll have to tell you, it was an eye opener. I mean, it was the first time I personally had ever experienced, and it was right here in Oak Harbor. I don't think that's mine this time. Thanks. Anyway. I know it's not mine. Okay. So I know that the two of you did not, in your business career, spend a lot of time with this issue. I believe you are people just like me who came from the business world, but you are both retired. You are hardworking community people that this is really important, and we appreciate what you're doing here and what you're trying to do and what you're it's not what you're trying to do, it's what you are doing. It's obviously probably might seem to be going slow, especially maybe in Oak Harbor at this time, but it is going. You're doing something about a problem, and thank you for that. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thank
We all do our part. Thank you.
Okay, next on our agenda, city administrator administration. So I know we have our city administrator here at the table. I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Merriman.
All right, thank you. I am here. Emma is not. She's busy at some training today, so I'm covering her recruitment dashboard. Just really briefly, as you can see, there's a handout I gave. I did email this out a little earlier as well. Currently, we have no open postings for any of our positions. However, that does not mean they're not very busy working on those that have received applications or closing up those that have been in process. There are 3 different ones that are in our in-process place right now. The Marina Maintenance Attendant 3 position, the Store and Drain Water Compliance Inspector or Educator, it's a mouthful for that one, and then our Plant Operator positions as well. So these are in the process of being development, getting the budgets. Most of them have budget approved, getting that part laid out. The ones that are closed right now, at least as far as accepting further applications, are shown in the red section there. We have our police captain. We have police recruitments for officers both at the entry level and lateral level. And then we have seasonal labor positions that we have hired, and we've listed the individuals there who have come in. And we actually have Mr. Powers' son helping us out this summer. So there's a familiar name on there. But these are the ones. We'll continue to put this information out, but this is just the current snapshot as of today for what we have in the HR process in regards to hiring and recruitment.
Okay,
That's it.
thank you, Dr. Merritt. And I think, any question or input about that? Okay, I think we're on to our next item. And that falls to our Development Services. I see Director of Development Services, Steve Bauer.
Thank you, Mayor, Council. Dennis Lefevre, as you know, has been working on the critical area ordinance update, and he'll continue his briefings with you this afternoon.
Thank you, Steve. Good afternoon, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. According to your agenda, this is our second briefing. Last month we had our first, and I'm promised to keep this second briefing brief. So essentially what I'd like to do is just do a couple of sentences on the history again. Under the Growth Management Act, communities are required to periodically update our comprehensive plan and our set of development regulations to make sure that they're consistent. Well, as of last June, the City of Oak Harbor did adopt our comprehensive plan update. And we have been working the last 6 to 8 months on doing our development regulation update process. And the biggest piece of the development regulations in the eyes of the state is essentially the critical areas update. So we've been working on that. The chapters that basically entail the critical areas are primarily the 5 categories. Again, we have the wetlands, we have fish and wildlife habitat conservation areas, we have geologically hazardous areas, we have critical aquifer recharge areas, and we have frequently flooded areas. In addition to those 5, we've also looked at a couple other chapters in our Title 20, and those are the definitions. And we've also looked at our general regulations, which kind of provide regulations overall, 5 categories of our critical areas. What we have in your packet for this afternoon is basically the draft ordinance, which is number 1801. And again, I apologize, it's kind of a lengthy ordinance. I have a tendency to do that with the low impact development ordinance and this one. But in order to encompass the proposed amendments that we're looking at, it had to be at this length. Attachment 2 of your packet is a complete section of the chapters with the strike through and underline identifying the amendments, because the ordinance only has those individual sections that are being changed. They don't have really the entire chapters. So we thought it would be a good idea to include the entire chapters with strike through and underline. The third attachment is the chapters in a cleaned version with the proposed amendments incorporated into that cleaned version. Some folks like to just read without the disturbance of looking through the strike through and underline, so that has been provided. And then as a fourth attachment, we have a list of all the sources that we've utilized to provide the amendments in our chapters for the critical areas. One of the key principles that the state has been influencing on all communities that are updating their critical areas is the use of best available science. You'll see that term used a lot, heard a lot when we're talking about critical areas. Briefly, the 5 categories that we have for our critical areas, we have incorporated all what is considered best available science by the state. Through the wetlands chapter, we've utilized the sample wetlands ordinance that was provided by the Department of Ecology. For your information, that same ordinance, which was created back in 2005, was also used as a template for our critical areas section. Fish and wildlife habitat conservation areas, the state recommended that we utilize the databases that are provided by Fish and Wildlife for their priority habitat species, constantly updated by the Fish and Wildlife Department, so that's a good source for our best available science. Through the Washington Department of Natural Resources, they have a natural heritage program. They have a set of maps that deals with ecosystem management for both species and vegetation systems. Also, the DNR has their water stream typing maps. They've gone to a different system for typing streams and creeks within jurisdictions, so we've utilized their mapping system as part of our update. And the Department of Health also have some shellfish information and databases, which we've incorporated as part of the Fish and Wildlife section. Geologically hazardous areas, again, the DNR has a set of database mapping, which is utilized by communities for best available science, and this all deals with faults, steep slopes, unstable slopes, tsunami, liquefaction areas, and those things. So we've utilized that information from the state for our best available science. Critical aquifer recharge areas, we've used what was available through the Department of Ecology. I've also had contact with the Island County hydrogeologist, Doug Kelly. There hasn't been much change in our section for critical aquifer recharge areas. And then frequently flooded areas, as you well know, earlier this year you adopted an ordinance which dealt with both updating our floodplain limits according to the new firm maps, the flood insurance rate maps, as well as dealing with the biological opinion, which was dealt with through FEMA, National Marine Fisheries Service, to deal with the Endangered Species Act issue. That's already been accomplished. We just kind of referenced that ordinance, which was in actually titled 17.20. So we have been incorporating our best available science as we are required to. The next steps, certainly be happy to answer any of your questions you might have at this point for this packet of information, but you do have the next month, so to speak, to kind of look over this, get into some detail on it if you choose. I have a placeholder on your June workshop so we can entertain some additional discussion. And then we are paralleling this track with the Planning Commission. We had a similar discussion with them last evening. They have a similar packet. This will also be on our webpage for public review. And again, we are gearing up for actually a proposal for adoption on your July 5th meeting based on a recommendation from the Planning Commission at their June meeting. So that's the schedule. That's where we're at with critical areas. I would be happy to answer any of your questions at this point.
Mr. Campbell?
Questions? Yes.
Yes, sir.
Said similar package talking about planning.
For the Planning Commission?
Yeah, it's the same package.
Yes, it is.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yep.
Other questions? Okay. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dennis. We appreciate it. So item number B, park plan update.
Mr. Kamak, our other senior planner, will lead the council through that one.
Thanks, Steve. Good afternoon. Just wanted to provide the council with the update process and the second tier of the existing park plan. Came to the workshop last month and provided the information that's in the tier 1 section of the plan, just the goals and policies and the guiding principles. Thought I'd come to this workshop and share the tier 2 information Just from a 30,000-foot level, without diving into the details, I think the council does have a copy of the plan. So I'll go over just some of the major topics that we have in there, so that I'm doing the same thing with the park board, I'm doing the same thing with the planning commission, so that we're all moving along the same line. And so when we get to the actual meat of the discussion, I'll be doing that with all the commissions and boards, and we'll be getting the input at the same time. So the Tier 2 section of the plan is kind of the meat of the plan. It has the inventory of all our parks. It kind of goes through and lists them in quadrants. In the original plan, we had the parks divided into northeast, the city divided into northeast and southeast and northwest, and kind of listed just a way of trying to identify whether we have adequate parks spaced out throughout the city. If you remember, with the 2016 update, we did a major change to the land use element, and we created neighborhoods. So I see one of the changes coming with this update is to try and categorize the parks into those neighborhoods that we've created, just to see how our service area works out in that fashion, just a different way of looking at it. Just like transportation plan, we also have level of service for parks. And we do it in two different ways in our current park plan. We do a spatial-based approach and a ratio-based approach. And the spatial-based approach is basically trying to determine whether we have parks in close proximity to where our citizens live. And so that's measured by area of coverage. For Oak Harbor, for the small community we have a level of service for neighborhood parks as a half-mile radius service area. And for community parks, we have 1 mile radius. And for trails, we have a half mile. For bigger cities, you can see how those can be bigger. Community parks probably sometimes will range to 3 miles, and neighborhood parks could go as much as 1 mile. But for Oak Harbor, half mile and 1 mile seems to be a good way to gauge whether we're providing those services. So I have a few maps here. If I can pass these around. Oh, I have them. Oh yeah. I can just, the different maps coming in different ways. So these are the maps that are, as they go around, I'll just chat about them. These are the maps that are in our existing plan. The one with the green circles that's coming from the left side is our coverage for the community park plans, and that is just a 1 mile radius. Just a couple quick thoughts on our coverage. Just because of how the city is laid out, and because of the uniqueness of the seaplane base that's in the city, and we don't actually have any city parks or city services on the seaplane base, we exclude the seaplane base from our spatial analysis. And community parks, and let me backtrack a little bit, community parks are like our Fort Nugent Park and Windjammer Park and Volunteer Park that has larger area and more facilities. And we've used that to do the coverage, the 1 mile, the green map that you see with the big circles. Now, Smith Park and Hal Ramley Park are also considered community parks, but they don't have quite the same services that the Fort Nugent or Windjammer or Volunteer does. They're community assets, and therefore we've categorized them as community parks, but we haven't done the spatial analysis with those parks because that doesn't make sense. They serve a very totally different purpose than our parks that have recreational facilities. So the green circles kind of indicate how much coverage we have with our community parks, and as you can see, the northwest part of town is kind of outside of that coverage area. And something to keep in mind as we...
You have one more of those.
Yes, I do. Oh, those, the brown one? Yes. Yeah. So you can see the northwest section is kind of deficient in service with regards to community park, and so when we have a future opportunity to look for a community park location, maybe that's a good area to look at, just to make sure that we have adequate coverage. The trails map, which is the brown one, is kind of, we can see how we fall short in terms of spatial service area for trails. The Waterfront Trail is the only trail in our community, and with the half-mile coverage, it does serve a very small area. People who want to use it probably are driving to it. Would be preferable if we have a network of trails that somebody can walk out of their home and go for an evening walk or a morning walk and not have to drive. But that's what our current service level is, and something as we move forward is to look on how better we can serve our community by establishing more trails. I'll come back at a later workshop and talk about the recommended plan and some of the future plans that's in the park, that's in the current park plan that does lay out some ideas for how to build more trails. But this is just an existing kind of a condition. This map indicates our neighborhood service area, and this is based on a half-mile radius. But for neighborhood parks, we kind of put in a couple little qualifiers for service area. And the reason is because we want neighborhood parks to be neighborhood. We have in our vision statement in Oak Harbor, we wanted to have that small town feel. And this is a great example of how we can apply that small town feel. So if we just draw a half-mile radius around every park that we have, we probably have full coverage. But if we really think about it, we have kids at home and you want to send them to the park, are you going to send them across Highway 20 to go to a park? You probably are not. So we wanted to make sure that it's really realistic. And so what we did was we established these barriers. All the streets are barriers. So if they cut one of the streets, the main streets, sorry, not all the main, the main streets, the high traffic streets are considered as barriers, and so where they intercepted the half-mile circle, we kind of cut them off just to see how where the service areas are. So all the green areas here are covered by some neighborhood park or the other, and the orange areas don't have any neighborhood parks. So those become areas of focus if we want to continue and provide neighborhood parks and provide a good service to our community. We should try to strategically try and locate parks in these areas for service. We do actually have a lot of parks for the size of town we're in, and that's not a question at all. Whether they are strategically placed and whether they are serving the community is the big question. It's more of a quality type thing. So in looking at so that's the spatial-based approach to determining our parks. There's also a ratio-based approach in determining whether we have adequate facilities, and this is kind of a ratio-based. For community parks, the national standard is 4 acres per 1,000 people in your community. That's kind of an average national standard. And for neighborhood parks, it's 1 acre per 1,000. And so we did an analysis, and based on that, we compared the analysis in 2000 and 2008 when we did the last plan update. So for neighborhood parks based on the 1 acre per 1,000, we were good in the year 2000 and we were good in 2008. We'll do it again for this time, and we'll see if we're still covering the ratio based. For community parks in 2000, we had 5.3 acres that we were below in terms of providing that ratio-based, service. And in 2008, we were 8 acres below. So our community parks are heavily used, and I'm sure you're all aware of our community parks and how much in demand they are. It is another need that the community does want. And I'll talk a little bit about the survey at the very end that we did in 2008, and that was identified as something that the community desires. They like the community parks, they like going to it, and our calculations back in 2008 indicated that we are short somewhat in acreage in terms of community parks. And we'll do that analysis again this time and see how short we are, and that just kind of creates knowledge in us that we do need additional community park plan. We did the ratio-based analysis back in 2008 for the recreational facilities as well. You know, you look at basketball courts and tennis courts and softball courts and little league fields and so on. And we'll do the analysis similarly for this year as well. In 2008, some of the things that were identified as we're short one basketball court, we're short tennis courts, and we were short baseball fields. So I don't think since our last plan we've added any of these recreational facilities to the community, so I'm sure they'll show up again in terms of efficiency. But we as a community don't have to necessarily meet these numbers, you know, and make them zero. We can determine, do we actually need them? Maybe our community is not trending towards certain sports and they're tending towards other sports, and we'll find that out maybe with the help of the survey. So that's where we kind of balance what the science or numbers show us and then what the need is, and figure out what we think we need going forward. Another tool that's in the tier 2 is it's what called the level of attention. It's a maintenance type tool. Where it's the amount of attention that you're giving to parks. And what we did in 2008 is we looked at all the parks and worked with the parks division and determined, kind of based on a national scale, on how much attention we're giving to each park. And so we went through that analysis, and that's in the current plan. This is a helpful tool in just kind of taking a snapshot of how we maintain our parks. Now, if somebody comes from the community and wants extra maintenance for a certain park or a certain type of park, it's a great tool to look at to see, okay, what needs to be notched up in order to provide that service, and then do we have the resources to actually do it? So it's not logical for us to say we want to maintain all our parks at level 1, because the amount of resources required for that would be tremendous in terms of manpower and funding, which you know, we don't have that kind of resources, so we have to tailor it. So it's just a tool in there to kind of give us a snapshot, and if we do want, or if we have the pressure to do something different with certain parks, then we should look at that to make sure that we balance our resources out and we can actually meet that need. So that tool is in the plan. And we'll see how the level of maintenance, we'll do an evaluation again this time to see whether we're keeping the same level of attention as we move forward. The last thing I'll address today is a survey, or a survey that we did with the 2008 update. It was one of the more successful surveys that we've done since I've been here. We had about, I want to say 650 responses on the survey, and the results of those are in the park plan, and I think we use the survey and the input from that to kind of generate some of the goals for the 2008 plan. And I'll come back and share more on the goals part of it. But I just wanted to share really quick on some of the survey findings. You know, simple questions like, when do you use the park, summer, winter, and of course our parks are used more during the summer. The amount is actually, we use the park 35% more during the summer than we do winter. So we see a big spike in the summertime in terms of use of our parks. Now, this may seem trivial, but if we really think about it and want to make best use of our community assets, such as parks, we should find a way to try and encourage the use during the winter as well. Just because the use of it goes down, you know, we're not using our resources very efficiently. You know, some of the things you can consider is lighting or indoor facilities and things like that. So this just indicates that there is potential in our parks in different seasons to use them, because we can accommodate a lot of use, and we do have a lot of parks. Community parks are used more frequently than neighborhood parks, and again, you know, that's again coming back to how much of a demand we have for community parks, and so it matches up with our ratio-based analysis that we're lacking in some of that. One of the most popular activities that people like to do in Oak Harbor is walking, hiking, and jogging. That came as the #1 activity based on the survey. And if we look at our trails, we have very little trails, and so there's a high demand for it, and we have less trail. So as we move forward, again, looking for opportunities to try and match the demand and the service. We asked a question about to the citizens on, we have numerous parks in and around Oak Harbor. We have city parks, we have county parks, we have state parks, we have Navy facilities. We asked them, if you had a choice, where do you go for your parks? And they chose city parks as the #1 option to go to. So it's a good thing. So we should continue to invest in our parks because our citizens do find that they are quality parks and they like to go to it. They think that the trails are not conveniently located. Again, I showed in the service area. But they think that generally our parks are in good condition. So we haven't gotten a lot of feedback saying our parks are really bad, you need to fix them. They think that it's run pretty good. The things that they want most is they want forest areas, they want more trails, and they mentioned other. And if you look closely in the survey on what they have other, because we gave a comment box to them, they mentioned trails again, they mentioned playgrounds, they mentioned swimming pools, they mentioned soccer field. And of all the things that they listed, more than 50% had indoor next to them, So I think the community has expressed a desire for indoor facilities as well through the survey. We asked a question about funding, in terms of investing in parks. What would people like to do? What would they support? And 46% indicated that they would support a sales tax or a user fee for parks, and more than 50% do not support property tax use for parks. So that was kind of just the feedback we got in 2008. So what we're hoping to do with this update this year is to actually release the same survey. We'll change it a little bit and add some things that over the years that we've learned in terms of options for them to pick. But it's a great gauge to find out, over the years how the community is changing, whether the desires of the community are changing, and whether we're meeting their needs. So that's the plan that we have set forth for ourselves to determine, engage the community in moving forward. So with that, I'll end. Next workshop, I'll come back and talk more about the 6-year plan that was developed in 2008, what the goals were, what we've accomplished, and what we still have in the books. And we can kind of, with that, then knowing what we have in our current plan, and then moving forward, we'll have a better way to know where to tweak it and where to make the adjustments. So that we have a vision going forward on what the park plan will accomplish for us in the next 6 years. So with that, questions, I'll be happy to answer any questions you have.
Okay. Questions? Yes, Councilor Davies.
Thank you, as always, very thorough report. It's interesting, and we all probably get a lot of feedback. I hear from people that they'd like, I think if I had to weigh one way or the other, they'd want to see more general, I use the term community parks rather than some of the smaller pocket parks. I think pocket parks are quaint. It always amazes me how we're able to maintain what we maintain with a very small maintenance crew, and then obviously some seasonal workers we add in. The trail thing was very intriguing to me, and I would very much support trying to find a way to fill in possibly that northwest quadrant. My kids personally have always enjoyed that Waterfront Trail, and it gives them a very safe route, really all the way from Scenic Heights, that area, or even from Fort Nugent if they cross 20th crosswalk, but all the way out to Mailer Point with very, very little, keep bringing that feedback, very little interaction with cars except maybe on Pioneer. So I would support, and it doesn't necessarily have to be, I guess, crushed gravel as far as the trail. I look at, I think it's the Child Development Center on Regatta. They've done kind of a meandering sidewalk, and that sidewalk is probably 6 to 8 feet in some areas. I don't know if we need to be that wide, but it's a very wide sidewalk that kind of meanders. It'd be interesting to try and connect some of those points to get a loop around town that was safe for someone to do a nice big route, whether they came down Regatta, it's an easy connection there to the Waterfront Trail. So just appreciate the work you guys are doing. And
I do, when I come back at the next workshop, I'll put up a map that's in the plan that has kind of a future trail system for connecting, the entire city. And that map, I think, if I remember right, is actually on the Scenic Heights Trailhead sign, kind of just a way to provide the community a vision for what we'd like to see. I see plans actually more in the 40 to 50 year range, even though we update them every 6 years. Some of these take a long time. And like you said, we, as we do development review and so on, we try to use these plans to ask developers to consider providing multi-use trails along some of the major street networks so that we can start connecting these trails. So if you can imagine from Scenic Heights, you start going west through Eagle Vista, when Eagle Vista gets connected, you extend a trail through there, you connect to Fort Nugent that way, and then you find a way to connect west of there, go through the golf course or go through some of those county roads, you connect to Joseph Whitby State Park, you come back through Crosby, and you connect through some of the 7th Avenue wetlands, and you connect to Regatta, and then you have Regatta, you have trails all the way back to the waterfront, and you can start to see how over time and with development and street projects that you can start to build these small pieces that will eventually connect. So it's really critical when we look at these projects, development projects and street projects, to try and make sure that we accommodate these ideas from these plans and make sure we have these trails in place so we can build those connections.
Yes, Councilor Wesson.
You mentioned indoor spaces for park property. Do you think maybe that survey, do you think people are meaning like a completely closed in indoor or more like open air? I know it just made me think like at Hillcrest, they have like the covered open air basketball courts or places for kids and adults to play. So they're covered from the rain at least. I don't know if something like that would be what people were thinking, to be able to play in the winter or fall when it's raining outside, play catch or play soccer or basketball, tennis even. So maybe trying to incorporate just something that simple that's maybe a little bit lower maintenance than a completely indoor heated. I can imagine the maintenance on something like that for the city, but just something covered too would be enjoyable in the winter.
We can try and incorporate in the questionnaire, the survey that we send out, with the way of trying to gauge, what they're trying to do. My guess is just saying, we live in an area where it rains a lot, and if they can still continue to play, even if the weather is, not that great, I think people will take, that opportunity to do so. But that'll be a great question to add in the questionnaire to see if we can gauge what they're really thinking about.
Yes, Mayor Pro Tem.
On the community part, you mentioned that the last time's analysis was made on the level of service for community park was in 2008. I think that analysis was made in that year after the Fort Nugent Park was completed. So at that time it was kind of sufficient. Now, the city does not own that property, and it's being leased for 20 years. It's about halfway down now, 10 more years on the lease. Now, hopefully, the school district will extend that lease. If not, it will be dramatically reduce the level of service for community park. The city is starting to work on looking for another place.
Good point. I think when we did the analysis in 2008, we did include the entire Fort Nugent Park. We included all the facilities, the soccer fields that are on the school district property, and we accounted that as being part of our service area. And if we took those out of our calculations, the need for community park will be more amplified, I think, because we've already in 2008 identified we're short 8 acres. So it is definitely a need. If we think about it in that fashion, it's definitely a need. We know as staff how long it took to get to Fort Nugent Park. I think it was in the works for more than 10 to 15 years before it became an actual park. And so, at least at the staff level, that's in our conversation continuously on where is the next Fort Nugent Park going to be, where is the next community park going to be. It's just a matter of when is the funding, opportunity, land, and all of that is available and it's coming together at the right time to make that happen. But yes, it's in the plan and it's in our thoughts while we do the budget and the capital improvement planning process. We bring up those questions to try and make sure that it's always on our radar. And then it's just a matter of opportunity on when that actually comes into implementation.
Was there a discussion of moving away from neighborhood park and use the impact fees from neighborhood park to a larger park, community park?
You might recall, Mr. Regal, that we combined that fee a while back. So we, rather than have a community park fee and a neighborhood park fee, we just now have a park impact fee. So from the time that the council authorized that change going forward, we have that flexibility with those dollars. Unfortunately, prior to that time, if the money is in the neighborhood park impact fee fund, I don't believe we're allowed to take that out and put it in over into the community parks. We still have to maintain the division between those funds. I will note, as an add-on to CAC's answer, that we do have, we've for quite some time reflected land acquisition in the 6-year capital improvement plan. Mrs. Rosen has faithfully submitted that request with each budget cycle. I believe this time around we were actually successful. $250,000 was able to be budgeted, but this is the first time in I don't know how long we've ever had the ability to actually have some funds that we could potentially use for parkland acquisition. Up to this point, the budget has not been able to handle it.
Thank you.
Councilor Holmberg?
Thank you, Mayor. So we don't, in an alternative to paying an impact fee, we don't have a development requirement or opportunity for the development to create a neighborhood park.
We actually do, Mr. Holmberg. That's
an option.
It's an option
Yeah,
to the
okay.
developer. It's been in the code ever since I've been here.
Okay. Then the next question is in the parks, it's an enterprise fund, correct? So you can't shift, it's not.
No, it's general funds.
It's-
What we can't move around is the impact fees, because once we collect an impact fee for a particular type of
Okay,
activity,
it has to go for
it-
that. the
it's
impact.
sacrosanct. It just
And-
stays in that pot.
But then you have to use that within 7 years?
It's 10 now.
Is it 10? It's changed to 10?
They moved it to 10 because of the recession.
So we have to use it, or then you have to give it back to the people who contributed
Yes.
for that impact. Are we close to losing that money?
Not that
Or
I know
doing a
of.
refund?
I think we've been pretty good at keeping our eye on that. But it's always something that that between park staff and finance staff, I think they stay on top of.
Okay. So then the next question is, so if you have parks and you have one situation where your park and your marinas is commingled, the parks, the marina is considered a park, part of it?
It's a recreational
It's a
facility.
recreational facility identified in the park plan.
Okay. And so we allocate overhead to the marina. How do we allocate overhead to that portion of the park? Or you don't?
The park isn't part of the marina. They're two separate facilities that sit side by side. So you have
There's no overlap in that?
well, they're two separate facilities. So you have the Catalina Park, which is a park under our parks system.
So that includes the ramp?
The ramp is part of the marina. The park staff, I believe, helps us with the maintenance on that, if I remember correctly. And they pay the water. That's the water supply that's there.
So the parks pays for the maintenance on the ramp?
They assist
and
it
the-
with it, and they
assist.
pay for the water.
It gets a little overlap in there,
Yeah.
doesn't it? And And then we use the marina as also a park for people doing some sports fishing off the pier.
Well, it's a recreation facility, so that's why we see it listed in the Parks, Recreation, and Open Space Plan. I think we do it disservice if we try to label it as a park. It's part of the parks plan, but it doesn't mean it's a
I'm
park.
not gonna get going down this rat hole here for a minute, but I get comments from time to time about the marina people paying the overhead, but the general public gets to use the whole facility, except, well, even they get in and use even the secured areas, because some of the secured areas aren't really that secure. So how do we separate out what the ratepayers pay down there and the general public uses the same facility?
So what I'd like to suggest, Mr. Allenberg, is that's really not a topic under the park plan update. I'm glad to engage in that conversation another time.
And that's why I said we're not gonna do that.
And I appreciate that, because the mayor has a meeting to get to, and I don't want to be the one who's holding him up.
Move on.
Anyone else? So did I hear you say, Cac, that we actually have maps that show actual trails?
Yeah, no, we have a plan that shows a vision for trails.
Okay. Do we have anything regarding bicycle routes?
We collaborate with the county. The county does a Parks and Trails plan, and in the past they have acquired grants to make maps, and we've worked with them to show connections of trails that go through Oak Harbor and such. But for ourselves, we don't have a trails map.
Okay. Anyone else?
Thanks,
Park
Cac.
plan update. Okay. Thank you, Cac. We'll move on. I guess that's our last item here. Countywide planning policy update.
I'm out of staff, so it must be my turn.
On your own here.
Mayor, with your permission, before I touch on that item, I do have an emerging item, and we talked to Dr. Merriam about it earlier. The marina, as you might imagine, it was kind of windy yesterday, and we actually had some damage last night because of the waves against the breakwater out there, FDOC. The same place that was damaged by the storm a couple of years ago. You recall we've been actively working on a claim with that, and we were this close to being ready to put the project out to bid, to come to ask you for permission to do that. It looks like our initial analysis is that we've got the situation where we need to do an emergency repair. If that's what ends up happening, if the city engineer and the other staff determine that's what we have to do, we'll have to get that done right away. But this is sort of your first heads up that we may have to do that, and if so, we'll evoke those procedures into code and keep you informed as best as possible. If that does not turn out to be the situation, then I think we were very close to coming to you to ask for your authorization to bid, but right now it looks like it'll be an emergency repair. With that out of the way, countywide planning policies.
Wait, can I ask a quick question here?
Yeah.
What happens if it's emergency repair, you have to go do it now?
We have to do it right now. We follow the procedures in our code that allows that project to be let without following necessarily the formal bidding process that we normally do, and without seeking your authorization first. But then we have an obligation to come back to you very quickly.
We have an asset to protect.
Right, we have an asset to protect, so we may have to pull the trigger before we could get to you to ask for your permission to start that process. But then we have an obligation to come to you at the next available meeting to tell you what we've done.
You briefly give us a description of what happened?
A chunk of the wall on the outside of FDOC has slid down into the water. So, and it sounds like probably some more damage on the north end of FDOC that would be new and above what had happened last year and above this section that is also failed. Countywide planning policies, real quickly. You might recall that we just went through a very lengthy process with the county to update those, and we got those updated in the beginning of 2016. What are they? There's a set of policies which guide and help us coordinate issues of regional significance, obviously planning types of topics, land uses and those kinds of things, development standards, where is growth going to occur, all of those regional issues are addressed at a policy level in the countywide planning policies. We knew at the time that we were going through that effort that it would be likely that once we got them adopted into place and started thinking about them and using them, that it would be necessary to do some tweaks. County started to see that last year. We started talking with them frankly, middle of last year, ramped up a little bit in the fall. As they were completing their work on their comp plan, they gave us a heads up that we were going to work on this together after the first of this year. And that's what we've been doing. So what we've provided for you in the packet was actually their first formal request for comments addressed to the mayor. They bulleted some things that they wanted to achieve with their update this time around. They gave us a strike-through version of the countywide planning policies, gave us a map that they wanted us to think a little bit about, and we've sent back our initial comment letter from a staff level. And you saw our copy of the letter in your packet. What are the main areas that these proposed changes really reflect? I think one area which might seem trivial but is kind of significant is there's several different places in the document where they're really trying to tie a definition or a concept more towards the state law, either the RCW or to the administrative code, the WAC, rather than we had some pretty good local definition, if you will, between some things, but upon further reflection, it made more sense to tie it to something that is more of a statewide definition standard, a little more concrete. So setting those aside, there are really three main areas that it changes. One is the joint planning area. And what is that? Well, the joint planning area and the countywide planning policies and the comprehensive plan and the urban growth areas, they all sort of flow together under the Growth Management Act. You can see how these things fit together in this real simple graphic. The GMA is the overarching principle. Got countywide planning policies that inform our comp plans. They help us figure out what the joint planning areas are, what the urban growth areas are. Ultimately, that results in our development regulations, the rules we use when people build things, right? And then sort of off to the side, we've got interlocal agreements, which is a different form of an agreement between us and the county about how we're going to do special things in special areas. So in that sort of center portion of the box, a lot of the changes you see in this document are helping us to think about the joint planning area and the UGA in a slightly more refined fashion. And so you saw this map inside of your packet, and the present joint planning area boundary really goes like this. And that's an area that's larger than our existing urban growth area, right? That's generally this boundary here. And it's that area where at some point in the future we may expand the urban growth area. So it makes sense for us and them to think about what are the things going to happen in that joint planning area so that if it becomes necessary for the UGA to expand, we haven't precluded urban development from taking place because we've already allowed something to happen that would stop that. That's what these changes are really helping to further define. Things like priority growth areas, auxiliary growth areas. Some areas are just plain undesignated. We don't have to put a label on every single piece of property. This is just a tool for us to think about the future. Second main thing that you see in these draft amendments are some changes to the urban growth area in terms of clarifying the criteria. How do we evaluate them? What the heck does that mean? What it really means is that when we do our capacity analysis, we've got criteria that we have to think about when we're trying to figure out, do we have enough land to accommodate the population? And what you see in the changes to the urban growth area, as well as the available lands analysis, are some refinements of those steps, those criteria. Ground truthing might be a phrase to use, trying to make the model better reflect the conditions that we have in our community. So really 4 areas of change. A lot of definitional things to square those up a little bit better. Areas in the joint planning area and the urban growth area, and then refinements of the buildable lands analysis. Process-wise, the county is working with their planning commission and the county commissioners. Obviously, we're talking to you right now, and we want to give you a heads up. We will give them some additional comments on a draft that we just got from them yesterday. And then we'll queue this up for conversation with our planning commission, figure out what the schedule looks like to get back to you. Ultimately, what we'll need to ask you to do is to adopt a resolution that would approve the amended countywide planning policies. But we're a little ways away from that, so as we get closer to that, we'll brief you again in one of these workshops. That's all that I have.
Input, questions? So, Councilor
Oh, I was
Watson?
just gonna say, I see a lot of land in that blue priority growth area to the south that may be nice and flat for some ball fields, soccer fields, maybe.
Always wearing that Little League hat, aren't you? huh?
Always. I care about soccer too, and
Yeah.
football.
Other input, questions? What is the time frame on that?
Well, the county has a desire to move quickly because this is a key part of their 2017 docket.
Okay.
They're actually trying to get to their commissioners in July.
Oh, well,
That may be too fast for them and for us, but what we said today in a conference call is that we'll get this scheduled for our planning commission in June and see how we do there, and how we do with you folks probably at your June workshop as well.
okay. I guess the one thing I'd like is a little bit larger scale map.
We can do better than this
Yeah,
for
okay.
you, sure. I just pulled this one out of the packet so that it looked
Yeah.
the same as the one that you had in your materials.
Okay. Anyone else? Questions? Okay. Okay, well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mr. Powers, and it looks like the last item on the agenda, we say city council. Is that just if anybody's got anything?
Yep.
Anybody got anything? Yes, Mayor Pro Tem.
About the storm wind yesterday,
Mhm.
last night, good it was no rain, but it caused some debris on the road, and there's one down tree, Columbia Drive, and half of that is, for the tree is protruding half of the road, causing safety on that road.
Okay.
Is the responsibility of the owner of the tree or public works helping out in that kind of removing the tree?
Usually during a storm event, if it's blocking the road, the fire department is the first responders with support from Public Works to clear it. If it's in power lines, then we have to, we may close the road and wait for Puget Sound Energy crews to come clear it out of their lines. We had that over on 8th. About a year ago, we had an instance where there was an oak, part of an oak had fallen on some power lines and we had to keep the road closed for a few days.
See, I'm not sure whether we know right here now whether it's been reported. So I guess that would be the first part of the answer would be if that incident has been reported, ICOM would normally do that, or the fire department could probably have an answer. So did you say Columbia Drive?
Columbia Drive between Ensign Drive and Capilano.
Okay, okay.
Yeah,
Did you make a note of that, Kathy?
on that road.
Oh, that's great, okay. We do respond often, but we have to be notified.
Thank you.
You bet. Anyone else? Anything? Well, that will conclude our workshop, special workshop today, May 24th. So 3:52. Thank you for coming.